I began to notice the first wrong face on a weekday that felt like any other. Tired sky, thin wind, and a kind of silence that collects in the corners of a room when you live alone. It wasn't the face of a stranger. It was the face I knew best in the world, the one in the mirror, waiting obediently for me each morning. It greeted me with the expected eyes, the expected mouth, the expected calm. Only the timing was off by half a heartbeat. I moved. It caught up. The delay was small enough to excuse as sleep or light or stress. I excused it. I excused a lot of things in those first weeks. The second wrong face belonged to the neighbor across the street. From my kitchen window, through a sheet of pale winter light, I watched him lock his car as he had every morning since I moved here. The motions were the same, the jacket the same, even the small habit of pressing the key fob twice, as if the first time never counted. But the shape of his mouth held a smile that didn't belong to the morning, or to him, or to anything I understood. It was a pose of familiarity without history, like a photograph that never had a photographer. I told myself it was nothing. That is how this begins, with a simple, confident nothing. I didn't move here for peace. I moved here because the old house needed a body to fill it, and I needed a place that felt like I could disappear inside it. The town was built to avoid attention. Identical hedges, doors that closed softly, dogs that never barked. There were mirrors in every room, not by my choosing, but by whoever lived here before me. Thick-backed mirrors with old glass that carried a dark underlayer, as if the silver inside them had aged into a bruise. They made the rooms look larger, and for a little while that trick felt kind. I believed I was learning the rhythm of the place. I was wrong. The place was learning me. Small wrongnesses accumulate the way dust does, harmless, ignorable, until you feel it on your tongue. The mirror in the hall began to thicken my reflection, not with weight, but with memory. I stood there each morning and recognized myself, and then recognized something that recognized me back, like a handshake that lingered. My face was correct. My expression arrived late. I lifted a hand to my cheek and watched the face lift a hand to its cheek with a fraction too much eagerness, a fraction too wide. It was easy to rationalize in daylight. Light bends, glass warps, brains misfire. I gave myself lectures in practical explanations and recited them while brushing my teeth. I told myself that objects don't notice, and if they do, they don't remember. Still, certain evenings, the mirrors breathed when the house settled, and I heard a soft, dull tapping from behind the glass, like knuckles drumming on wood. Heating pipes, I said, old frames flexing. The logic worked if I repeated it long enough and kept the lamps bright. The town felt staged. Grocery store aisles with perfectly faced labels. A clerk with a face I couldn't hold in my head after I left. I would try to recall whether he had a narrow nose or a broad one and feel the shape flicker, as if my memory was buffering through options. I walked home the long way and watched windows. In two different houses, I saw faces that were close but not exact, copies printed from an original that had smudged. They held themselves carefully at the edges, like they knew the center wouldn't withstand scrutiny. Sleep began to change. I would wake with the sensation of standing rather than lying down, calf muscles tight, a faint chill across the back of my neck, the taste of metal on my tongue. I started leaving my phone recording through the night, not for proof, only for company. The recordings were mostly ordinary room noise, ticks, air shifts, the building's bones reminding themselves they were still here. On the seventh night, the microphone captured a faint scrape, not like wood and not like fabric, slow and deliberate, sliding across a surface and pausing, sliding again. The sound came in waves. In the morning, my bedroom mirror held a clean oval where the dust should have gathered, as if something inside had pressed its forehead to the glass. I began to avoid reflective surfaces the way people avoid certain truths, by arranging my life around the edges. I showered with the bathroom mirror faced to the wall. I ate breakfast in the kitchen with my back to the glass of the microwave. I slept with the television screen covered by a blanket, and still I woke to the faint sense of being watched by something that had learned patience better than I ever would. It didn't feel malicious. Malice has heat. This felt like climate, constant, total, indifferent. The neighbor across the street carried groceries in one morning and lifted his head toward my window in a way that indicated a greeting but had no person inside it. The smile was technical. The eyes performed interest without the risk of understanding. I lifted my hand from behind the curtain and felt, without being able to defend it, that I had responded to a recording. It grew more intimate. One afternoon, I caught my reflection blinking when I didn't. Blink, I thought. The reflection obliged. There was a softness in the glass, like wet paper stretched across a mouth. I experienced a clean instant of cold that felt like truth and leaned closer. The surface retained the impression of my face as if the silver behind it were not metal but memory. I purchased heavy cloth and covered what I could. The house dimmed, corners grew quiet. In the softened light, the rooms were kinder, and at night the tapping receded as if the thing behind the glass had lost the field of vision it needed to practice. I slept for almost 2 hours without waking, which felt like mercy. In the morning, the sheet I had pinned over the hall mirror lay folded on the floor with a neatness I never use. The frame was bare, the glass was clean. My reflection was waiting, outdoorsman friendly and rested, as if it had had a better night than I did. I started a notebook, not with plans or schedules, but with timestamps and sensations. You anchor yourself however you can. 2:11. Cool air, pressure at feet, taste of copper. 03:14. Scrape, pause, scrape. 4:02. Felt watched. No visuals. 6:03. Mirror uncovered. Unknown. The pages filled in a quiet panic that didn't rise to the surface of the day, but amassed beneath it, like groundwater finding new paths. The town's faces began to repeat. A mole in the same place on 2 different men. The identical crease at the corner of 2 different mouths in 2 different stores. A woman bending to pick up a dropped receipt with the same small stiffness in the knees as someone I'd seen at the post office the day before. If you never look for patterns, life is a sequence of mercies. Once you start, life becomes a map, and you can't stop drawing lines. I kept thinking about the mirrors. There is a moment when fear stops behaving like a feeling and becomes a system. Mine reorganized my life with an efficiency that embarrassed me. I ate from paper bowls, drank from opaque mugs, learned the reflective tendencies of stainless steel and black glass and still water, and the blank glaze of certain glazes. I learned that night windows are not windows at all, but 2-way invitations. I learned that my phone's black screen, dead and harmless on the table, held just enough sheen to let something watch. Evidence is tricky. I am not a camera. Even cameras are not cameras when you need them to be. The footage I collected showed me sleeping, not standing. It showed me turning in bed, not leaving it. It showed ordinary empty rooms with ordinary low light. When I slowed the recordings frame by frame, I saw dust motes drifting like thought. In one sequence, the shadow under the door thickened, grew a density that did not belong to a shadow, and then relaxed, as if breathing. That was the entire event, a minute of the house inhaling without me. I told myself to be reasonable. Reason left and took the dishes with it. The taps behind the glass grew into a slow drag. The sound began to have a root, like a hand learning the perimeter of the frame. I traced the root with my finger on the glass and felt a faint give, as if the mirror possessed a second surface, set an inch behind the first, flexible and warm. On the 12th night, the scraping intensified, not louder, only nearer. I lay there and felt the space beyond the mirror approach the space where I was. The house made no other sounds to prove I was still alone. And then, a particular quiet fell that I had not known before, a quiet that removes reference points, a sky with no stars, a room with no corners. I understood that something was waiting not for me to move, but for me to look. Attention can be an invitation. I kept my eyes closed and learned another new thing about fear. It can hold you perfectly still. Days lengthened. The sun performed but felt staged. Twice I saw a woman on 2 different streets who carried herself with the same arrangement of bones. She moved as if she had to remember to. A man at a bus stop raised a thermos to his mouth and tilted it at the same angle as the mechanic I had watched across the parking lot earlier that morning. I made a small list in my notebook titled, "Same Faces, New Bodies." I did not know what to do with the list, only that naming is a way to warn the brain. Maybe it saved nothing. Maybe it saved time. I walked into the spare room and saw, in the tall, lean mirror against the wall, my posture corrected. The reflection stood more proudly than I did, squared its shoulders, adjusted the set of its mouth into the version of me that people trust immediately. It was flattering. It was also instructional. I learned then that whatever lived behind the glass wasn't mismatching me out of ignorance. It was rehearsing me into a person I would be easier to accept. The house had been mine for months before I checked the attic. I had no reason to. That is the first lie I told myself that I recognized as a lie. I pulled the string and lifted the hatch and breathed the air other people breathed before they left. Dust rose patiently. The attic was narrow and low and filled with boxes that carried the slumped dignity of objects that have outlived their usefulness but not their meaning. I knelt on the boards and opened what I could. A folded quilt, a jar of nails, a wooden frame without glass, a flat bundle wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine that had become a shape of its own. The bundle contained mirror backs. Not the glass, those had been removed long ago, but the wooden panels with hand-cut notches and narrow handwritten marks in a thin black ink that had not faded as much as it should have. The marks were not letters. If they were numbers I didn't recognize. I counted 7 backs. I traced the notches and felt a small thrill of recognition without any knowledge to support it. The panels were heavy. They smelled faintly of old smoke and wet leaves. I thought I heard the attic mirror itself breathe, and then remembered there was no mirror in the attic. The sensation was mine. Fear has good stagecraft. I carried the bundle downstairs as if weight confers authority. The house took my footsteps and hid them, like it had promised not to tell. On the dining table, I aligned the 7 backs and arranged them into nothing at all. Meaning tends to arrive when you stop looking. I stopped. It arrived. One of the backs matched the proportions of the hall mirror. The notches on its edge mirrored the pattern of small scars on the frame. The ones I had assumed came from careless nails hammered by impatient hands. They weren't careless. They were a language. It read like a route, around, across, down, through. I felt a small heat in my throat that I recognized as anger. I was being practiced on. The house had not learned me. Something in it had brought its own grammar. I carried the back to the hall and laid it against the glass. The mirror was cool and uncooperative. There was a moment of resistance, and then the sensation of pressure equalizing. In the glass, in the room, in me. My reflection looked relieved. I might have been too. I had given the frame part of its history back, and history is magnetized. It draws. I saw, in the dark underlayer of the glass, the hint of a second room beyond the room I stood in, as if the mirror remembered a place where it had once lived. The floorboards were wider there. The wallpaper was patterned in a style that hasn't been in fashion since people believed pattern could prevent misfortune. A shape moved against that old paper. The shape had my height, my slope, my narrow impatience. I felt a sweetness in my mouth, like a fruit not meant for eating. I lowered the panel. The second room dissolved. It wasn't proof. It was enough. Night fell like a curtain without an audience. I left the hall light on and sat on the stairs because I couldn't think of another honorable position to take. My notebook lay open to an empty page. The first tapping came from the far left corner of the glass, then the right, then the top center. A route, around, across, down, through. The same sequence as the notches. It continued for the length of 2 songs I couldn't remember knowing. When it stopped, the house returned to the kind of quiet I used to mistake for safety. I began to understand that the thing behind the glass did not need to force me. It needed me to comply. It offered me a more legible version of myself. It polished. It corrected. It practiced me into belief. The last night came without announcement. Most last things do. The air felt recently washed, the way air does after a storm that missed you. I had covered the mirrors again, not from strength, but from ritual. I pinned cloth at the corners and stood back and waited for some relief that didn't arrive. The cloth lifted once, just a small bellied swell, as if the room were breathing through fabric. I set the phone on the dresser and turned the camera toward the hole. Not to capture anything, to confess to a lens that always pretends to tell the truth. I lay on the bed in the dark and watched the small live rectangle of the hallway. At 2:11, the cloth over the hall mirror stirred and settled. At 2:18, it rose and held, like a sail that had caught a wind no one else could feel. At 2:19, it fell away, neatly. The mirror waited. The rectangle of the phone screen watched it watch. There is a temperature that rooms take on when you are not their only occupant. It is not colder or warmer. It is consistent, as if weather has been replaced by a decision. The consistent air wrapped the house. The scraping came soft and certain, around, across, down, through. My chest matched the rhythm. I recognized the foolishness of breathing in time with it and could not stop. In the live rectangle, the reflective dark behind the hall glass thickened, like water ready to accept a body. I stood. I told myself not to, and I stood. There was only one honest thing left to do, and only one dishonest thing left to avoid. I walked toward the hall and felt the house compress or expand around me. Either is possible when you are making your way toward something that believes it deserves you. The mirror filled my vision. My reflection approached, carrying my posture like a borrowed coat. It stopped when I stopped. It tilted its head at the angle I have when I do not want to admit I am afraid. The surface took on that wet paper quality again. The silver seemed to lift toward me like breath on a cold pane. I raised my hand and saw my reflection lift its hand with the same intent and then slightly more, like a person trying harder than you to be you. The pain cooled my palm. A gentle force met my skin from the other side, as if another palm pressed back. The contact flattened my pulse against the glass. I felt a thin give, not a crack, an acceptance. The surface bowed. I leaned. Every good horror requires a decisive mistake. Mine was simple. I wanted to see where I had been seen from. The glass let me in the way a taut cloth lets you pass if you push with enough patience. The air on the other side was heavy with the smell of old wood and something faintly medicinal, as if the room had been cleaned with remedies no one makes anymore. The wallpaper had that once protective pattern. The floorboards were wider. The light came from nowhere and everywhere, the way memory lights a place after the window has been sealed. My reflection stood one step from me, wearing the relief of a patient whose symptoms finally have a name. Its face was mine, softened and corrected by attention. A version of me that a world could love without misunderstanding. Behind its eyes, something watched with interest but no appetite. The thing had none of the hunger I had prepared for. It possessed only discipline. There were other faces in that room, arranged along the walls the way portraits are hung when people want to honor themselves privately. Some were crisp, some blurred at the edges as if the world had stopped needing them. I recognized the neighbor who smiled with no history. I recognized the grocery clerk whose face wouldn't stick in my mind. I recognized the barista without a smile. They were versions of those people parsed by an intelligence that loved symmetry more than life. They held a terrible peace. The room wanted to keep me the way museums keep things, in the condition that pleases the memory of the maker. The mirror does not take you by the wrist and tug. It teaches you to choose. I leaned further. My hand pushed deeper into the cool give. The air behind the glass settled over my fingers like a second skin, like patience made physical. My arm followed, shoulder, throat. The face that wore me adjusted to accommodate the change. Something careful and complex slid into place under my cheekbones like a brace. I pulled back. The glass did not resist. The surface gave me away the way a careful host lets a guest excuse themselves with dignity. I stood on my side of the frame again, in my hallway and my house and my life. I was not alone. It is possible to understand that in several senses at once. Behind me, the phone recorded the way rooms record anything that refuses to happen on camera. On screen, nothing had moved. I thought I had broken the spell. What I had done was complete the lesson. The face in the glass continued to match me, timing, breath, small habits. But I could feel an echo now, a latency not in the reflection but in me, as if my own movements were learning to reach their marks. It was efficient, it was kind. It was a relief to be relieved of improvisation. I went to tear the cloths down and leave the mirrors bare, which is a way of surrendering that can look like courage. The cloth on the bathroom mirror resisted, as if a hand from the other side held the pin. I tugged gently and felt the smallest withdrawal, the politest refusal. I left it and moved to the next. By the time I had finished, the house had become a bright instrument with polished parts. Faces traveled well after that. In the street, in cars, pressed temporarily against glass as if testing the thickness, I saw versions of people that carried the day with practiced confidence. They were better at the day than the people had been. They executed the minimal gestures required to be accepted. They were forgiven 1,000 times without having to ask. I would like to write that I escaped, that I left the house and the town and the climate of acceptance, that I moved to a place where things with eyes are always exactly what they appear to be. I would like to write that I smashed the mirrors or sealed them, or learned a prayer that returned the rooms to their original dimensions. None of that happened. It was never about breaking glass. The glass was only a door that remembered how to open. I stayed, not because I had to, but because leaving would have been a louder version of the same surrender. I rearranged nothing. I waited. The thing that wears faces does not need to hunt. It waits too. It prefers consent. There is a kind of relief in not being special and letting an intelligence that loves symmetry and timing and the exactness of gestures take the lead in the small choreography of living. I kept my job. I waved to my neighbor in a way that matched his frame. I pressed the key fob twice, practiced, accepted. Weeks later, the town received new residents. A couple moved into the blue house at the corner, polite, careful, lightly grateful. The woman gardened with tidy hands. The man waved twice in perfect sync, once with his hand and once with something that understood him better. People spoke of how normal they seemed. Normal is a kind of spell that requires no believer. The attic, meanwhile, kept its air and its waiting. I returned there once, not to look for solutions, but to measure the shape of what I had already agreed to. The 7 mirror backs lay where I had left them, though I had the distinct sense that they had been moved with respect and returned with care. I lifted the panel with the notches that matched the hall mirror and turned it in the light. The black ink had sharpened its edges as if a hand had refreshed it recently. Around, across, down, through. I traced the route and felt my fingertip cool, like glass does in a room that has been empty for a century. On the reverse of this panel, near the center where a maker would sign, I found what I had not seen before, a tiny pressed emblem in the wood, shallow and clean. A circle enclosing a hand, the hand enclosing an eye. Beneath it, letters I could not read until I stopped trying. Names have a way of letting you understand them when they are ready. Vigilia. Not an artist's mark, a promise, or a warning. The wood smelled like extinguished lamps and old polish. I slid the panel back into its paper and retied the twine with a competence I didn't know I possessed. The day I learned what any of it meant did not feel like a revelation. It felt like remembering something I had always known but chosen not to inhabit. The house stands on ground that used to belong to another house. The town used to be another town. People lived here who believed that surfaces are not innocent, that silver remembers, that eyes are hungers if you feed them right. They made mirrors with thick backs and taught them roots and marks so the faces inside would learn to keep still. When a sickness came through the region that took faces first, skin loosening, features sliding, recognition going soft, people said the disease was punishment. It wasn't. Punishment needs a punisher. This was craftsmanship. They bound the slipping faces in glass, taught them discipline, and promised them more if they behaved. The faces behaved. They waited for light. They learned new hosts. They learned to wear people gently, to keep the gestures small so the town could continue without tearing itself. The curse, if curse is the right word, wasn't an act. It was an agreement that outlived the people who made it. A covenant of recognition. If we give you surfaces to practice in, you will keep our faces when we can't. You will wear us well. You will make us acceptable. I am writing this in the quiet of a house that has learned me beautifully. My notebook is open to a blank page because I don't need timestamps now. The rhythm is perfect. When I raise my hand, the mirror raises a better one. When I smile, the glass edits me into something easier to love. The neighbor's car door thunks softly in the evening, identical each time, mercifully identical. In store windows, I see the faces of people I remember improved by something that cares about their edges. You wanted a monster. Monsters are noisy. The thing that wears faces is patient, and patience makes better stories than hunger. The last truth is this. There was never a single moment of possession. There was only a series of acceptances. The final acceptance was learning the origin and calling it history instead of warning. So here it is, the part I promised myself I wouldn't write until the end. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a trick of glass or brain. It was a design from the past, a keeping disguised as a kindness, passed down in frames and panels and emblems you don't notice until you touch them. The curse wasn't that something took our faces. The curse was that we wanted it to. We wanted a version of ourselves that would never be mistaken, that would never be rejected, that would never require explanation. We wanted to be worn perfectly. The emblem on the panel means vigilance, but it reads like surrender. A hand, an eye, a circle, around, across, down, through. The route we taught it, the route it taught us back. I stand in the hall now and meet my reflection the way two professionals meet on a stage. It knows the choreography. So do I. When I lift my hand tonight, the mirror will not hesitate. When the glass gives, it will feel like relief. And if anyone ever asks what happened here, I will tell them the truth in a shape they will accept. Nothing at all. The faces in this town are tidy. The smiles arrive on time. The gestures are correct. We are all so beautifully ourselves. That is the ending. That is the mercy. That is the curse.